USFL have an attendance and TV rating problem in their second season? Well, we're here to answer that question today with straight facts. No guessing, no anything at all. We obviously know there is a percentage where the league has dropped off from last year, whether it is TV ratings or attendance in general. We have seen this across the board, which completely understand. There's no way to spin that in a positive way here on the channel, which I like to do, but to at least give some context. And I think that's where the big part of all this situation and scenario comes from, is the fact of context. Context could really give you a key into why we have seen such a massive drop in the 8 areas of the league. Or 8 teams of the league. So let's go ahead. I'm going to pull this up on the screen here. It is going to go full screen. So I am essentially going off camera for the video, but I will be doing essentially chapters in this video that you can kind of scroll through and look at and everything. So let's go ahead and talk about this. So first and foremost, we are starting back with the XFL in 2020. I was thinking about potentially including AAF in these, but there isn't enough markets that the AAF had to really compare going back that far and really kind of justifying the attendance and why that even mattered to today, or even to justify why maybe the league needs to go into some of those markets in that perspective. So when we look at the XFL 2020 attendance, obviously this was the league that only played 5 weeks due to the pandemic, shutting down the sports world and pretty much the entire world at that point. But these numbers will kind of come a little bit more into play for the remaining teams that exist in the UFL today into that comparison. Now, of course, a lot of these markets on the screen here are not in the UFL currently. One would beg to basically state that the Seattle Dragons, or Seattle Sea Dragons in 2023 is a viable market that, regardless of what the UFL decides to do in 2026, I still think that if they are debating expansion due to what is currently going on with attendance and ratings in the UFL, I think that would be the best place to start, is to go back to Seattle. It is a very well-known, built fan base that they could continue. And if they got a decent schedule put together for the Dragons or Sea Dragons at that point, I think they could really utilize the Seattle market very well at Lumen Field and everything like that. So when we look at this, obviously in just 5 games, they had 334,272 attendance, averaging 18,571 per game. Now, if you look at this overall in those 5 weeks, not one team dipped below 12,000 in attendance. It came close between the Guardians and Wildcats, but otherwise, nothing dropped that low. And quite frankly, not much dropped below even like 17,000, give or take a few games here and there. But when we're looking at it, there was just a whole different perspective when it came to the XFL in 2020 as to what we know of spring football today. And I think that that's where we've kind of need to look at it in the media and as a fan perspective, that it's really hard to expect this type of level of commitment from fans, from people in these areas. Some people may not even live in these states anymore. This is going on almost 5.5 years later after the XFL 2020 season even occurred. And these markets, obviously more than half of these markets don't even exist anymore. I guess you could say half of them at this point. But it does remain to be seen I know the XFL in 2023 and UFL currently essentially signed a deal with the city of Arlington to name them Arlington Renegades instead of Dallas. But could that also be a factor here of why their attendance has plateaued at where it currently is? And it's funny because I've seen a lot of people in the media and around say that, like, now that Arlington is completed the 2025 season for home games, that people are like concerned that, like, it is not what the league is wanting for this team. And I get that, but it still is very consistent from 2023 all the way up to now. And we'll talk about that as we go through this. Next up on the actual slides here is the USFL 2022 attendance. Now, this looks weird, and it is because it is. The USFL in 2022 and 2023, to put into perspective, was a hub format for 2022. So they played all their games minus playoffs and championship game in Birmingham. They played 4 games, I believe, at Legion Stadium, and the remaining 36 games at Protective Stadium, and then championship and playoffs and championship in Canton. The only number that we know is published is the first game for the Birmingham Stallions and New Jersey Generals on opening night in 2022, and that attendance is 27,396. We don't know an average for the Birmingham Stallions that year because we never got numbers after that. The league was not really concerned about attendance. Fox Sports was more concerned about putting a product on TV that was decent. And I'm not saying the USFL was terrible. There are some terrible teams in the USFL, just like there is in any spring league. But in this perspective, when we're talking about attendance, there was just nothing on record. And I know because they played all their games, all 8 teams played their games at the same stadium, that could have potentially at that point wore down fans to even attend the games. I know the next day, they were supposed to have 3 back-to-back games, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, one in the evening. Or I think it was one in the morning, very morning, one in the afternoon, and one going into the evening, essentially on that Sunday. There was a lot of weather in the area that caused issues. And then one of the games ended up being canceled and moved to Monday night due to weather. I was at those games that weekend, and I think the following day on Sunday, for the remainder of the schedule for those 2 games that did get played, there probably was no more than 150 people in attendance. Like, that's kind of what the USFL was in 2022. There's a lot of criticism from, like, everybody with Fox Sports and stuff like that. That's not why we're here today. Quite frankly, if they didn't put their numbers on record anywhere, that is completely up to Fox, and that is not included in our data. But I wanted to just point out that Birmingham Stallions, 27,396 people on opening night. I was there. I still feel there was more than that in attendance. Again, we know numbers for these attendance doesn't always include people in attendance, but includes comp tickets and all that stuff. I know they were letting kids in for free without a ticket in a lot of scenarios during that first night. I would say there's probably more closer to 35,000 at that game, but I don't think they technically counted that as that. So either way, doesn't matter here. Just want to point that out. Then we move on to the XFL in 2023. This is where we started getting actual numbers and data from all 8 teams in the XFL. And quite frankly, again, if we're keeping track on the Arlington Renegades, we know that in 2020, they were averaging way more than 12,055, but their total attendance for this season was 60,274. This is kind of where we get into that question that a lot of people have said and kind of criticized me on, of the Houston Roughnecks need to be in the XFL division, because that would then put essentially all 3 Texas teams having to play each other twice in a season, and that would then result in a higher attendance for those teams. Well, here's the data for you right here. All blue text games for Arlington, Houston, and San Antonio are games in the Texas market and shared with the Houston teams, or in the Texas teams, essentially. And as you can see, by looking at this data, it really didn't do anything. If you look at the Houston Roughnecks, most of their games, other than the fifth game in Houston, those Texas games didn't even draw more than teams that came from out of state. Technically, I mean, we all know that XFL and UFL have all the teams technically housed in Texas, but you get my point. They're not DC or whoever the case may be they're playing. So when you look even at Arlington here, their numbers didn't really change other than that final game in Arlington, which, if I'm not mistaken, was San Antonio, I think, was their home game, that last home game for Arlington, because I know they played Houston. It may have even been Houston. I'm not quite sure. Either way, like you can see, though, through these numbers that, yeah, sure, the Texas games brought in more people, but it's hundreds of people, not thousands, hundreds, if that. And then you look at like San Antonio market, the Texas games, again, drew a couple hundred extra people than any of the other games that were played. So in reality, having the three teams in Texas and be in the same division really did not do much for attendance. Now, could it have this year? Possibly. That is a possibility, but we're seeing less and less people travel to these games in the same states. And that we'll look at that in the UFL in 2024 and the UFL this year with those type of numbers and everything. So as you can see here, obviously, overall for the XFL in 2023, 592,128 was the total attendance, averaging 13,770 per game. Now, the big thing is here, obviously, on Friday night in Arlington, 11,032. I was at that game. It was against the Seattle Sea Dragons. That was the only Friday night game the XFL had. Then you had a Monday night game for the DC Defenders at Audi Field. 12,492. Not like that was not their highest attendance, but it was their third highest attendance for that season. And then, of course, you had Thursday night games, which were both Seattle Sea Dragons. Those games suffered massively. They were the two lowest games in the Seattle Sea Dragons. They just didn't work. We learned that pretty quick that Seattle really did not get great times for their games due to travel, due to just everything going on at Lumen Field, sharing soccer field, things like that. So when you really put into perspective these scenarios, you can see that despite that, the Sea Dragons still brought in 61,640 fans, averaging 12,328 total. I apologize if you hear my dog barking in the background. Averaging, obviously, the 12,328. If you look at this number, the Vegas Vipers were very consistent, 6,028, but it's really no different. It's just a couple thousand, if that, from what Birmingham and Memphis is currently pulling in the UFL in 2025 is just above that 6,000 number that the Vegas Vipers essentially had. So when you put all of this into perspective, you kind of see the claim here. Like San Antonio Brahmas obviously had 74,914 in 2023. They drew very big for their first game, and then it was almost half the attendance for each game after that. And you look at Orlando, they were the lower team. They were kind of what we see in Birmingham or Arlington, those type of teams nowadays, where Arlington back then was pretty consistent drawing their 12,000 number. Obviously, they had 60,000. So Audi Field, these are all, as we look at it, obviously St. Louis Battlehawks are going to be your higher number here no matter what. We know that that area is higher, but we look at other teams. You had Seattle and DC and Arlington being the other top three markets, and the Brahmas obviously, but the XFL in 2023 drew quite a bit. But it, again, having the teams in Texas and in the same division really did not pull significant numbers to, in my opinion, to justify at all having them in the same conference, at least in 2023. We'll look at as we go through here. So next up, we have the UFL in 2024 attendance here. And in reality, when you're looking at this data and everything here, is the factor that Arlington Renegades dropped almost about 11,000 from the XFL season to the UFL season with the merger. 49,434. They were, again, most of their games were averaging around 8,000, give or take, or not like their average, but the three games obviously were in the 8,000 range. It was the initial home opener against the Birmingham Stallions that was bringing in a lot more eyes and viewership at 14,153, and then it kind of just dipped from there. You had the little bit of the increase for the I believe that was the San Antonio Brahmas that played it. Yeah, San Antonio Brahmas game, which was 10,283. So in that scenario, yes, that drew almost about 2,000 more than normal in that scenario, averaging still 9,887. Birmingham Stallions averaging 10,255. And the numbers continue to just go on and on and on, as we can see. But we do see, point in case, you can see here on the screen, I'll move my mouse over, that Houston, Memphis, and last year Michigan were all those teams that were kind of questioning. A lot of people were questioning, should Michigan be moved out of Ford Field? Should they get them out of there? They shouldn't be there. We've kind of learned this year that was a little bit different. They've done pretty well this year for attendance. But again, you see a trend here of teams. San Antonio was averaging 11,888, and then you had St. Louis. But if you go back to the XFL in 2023 here, St. Louis was averaging 35,104. From the merger, they dropped roughly, give or take, about 800-ish people per game. Not actually that bad of a drop. And again, they all had 5 games at that point. We have a little bit of a difference here this year, obviously. But as you can see, USFL division for championship game, 10,287. XFL division, 30,237. And that was St. Louis, of course. And then the championship game, 27,396 in St. Louis. Again, if the UFL in season 2 somehow has St. Louis in the XFL Conference Championship and the championship game in St. Louis, those numbers are going to be significantly higher, in my opinion. If they're not, that is a huge red flag even for a St. Louis market, despite the fact that they are still averaging about that 34,000 in the regular season. Total, again, 580,711, averaging 13,505. Now, talking about the games in blue, we talked about Arlington, but if you look at Houston had both playing San Antonio and Arlington last year at home, and as you can see, one of those two games, and I don't have a marked of which was what, but again, you can tell those games did not draw more in except for the 7,179. The other game was actually lower than all the games. And then you look at San Antonio, And the 11,395 was pretty average to what they were getting throughout the season. Same goes for the Houston Roughnecks. Those were average numbers, and that the number does not support that the Houston Roughnecks need to be in the XFL conference and play the San Antonio Brahmas and Arlington Renegades twice to pull up numbers. If they did, it's still going to draw maybe a couple hundred extra. You don't have like the entire fan base, let's say 9,000 people, which again, you're still not actually getting 9,000 physical bodies into the game. We know that. So at that point, like when you look at that high number of 9,157, and then it's averaging 6,000, you're not adding that on top of a normal crowd in Arlington or in San Antonio. And that's a big factor there when it comes to it. So again, the overall attendance, 580,711, averaging 13,505. Then we move on to here. And this is where I've kind of labeled out. Now, the blue teams, I have still conferenced them in as XFL. I know Houston, for this example, and attendance for 2025, we're looking at this. So, again, the teams in yellow are kind of average. I almost want to move, now that Arlington has completed theirs, I almost want to move them to green because, again, 9,887, 9,763. They're only roughly about 100 and 25 or 24 from per game to their last year's average. I don't know how people are saying this is a struggling market that could potentially look the move. It doesn't really make sense to me. I've seen this through some of the media recently for the UFL that they're saying like Birmingham, Arlington, Houston, and Memphis could all be teams that could be like moved. And I'm like, but Arlington is like literally at this point right now on like the average point. So it's kind of weird to me, but either way, then we look at the Birmingham Stallions, who have had 4 games, and you can see the issue. 10,000, 9,000. They dipped up a little bit for the 3rd game and then back down significantly for their 4th game. They're averaging 8,406 compared to last year, 10,255. So again, that is a huge drop for Birmingham Stallions, and a lot of people are trying to write their own narrative of why that is, because quite frankly, from what I've heard, Birmingham has done a very good job at advertising, having events, and stuff like that in Birmingham. Outside of the fact that they are not practicing in Birmingham, which again, we can 100% say that does not matter because Birmingham was in Birmingham from 2022 through the 2023 USFL season and housed there and trained there, and that still didn't help them. Just like Arlington in 2023, 2024, and 2025. Same with the Texas teams. This is not drawing more people in with the teams in their actual home markets, practicing, training camp, and all that type of stuff. I am curious to see if that could change things, but Birmingham's an example of why it hasn't. And quite frankly, it'd be crazy if they move the Birmingham Stallions at this point. I would be shocked. We look at the DC Defenders. They are currently right now sitting above average of last year. So last year, 11,767. They're on average to surpass last year's attendance, which DC has always been a good market for the UFL and XFL in general across the board. They have a decent team. They are really good this year. I expect numbers to continue to grow in DC, especially if they have the conference championship game in DC this year. There's a possibility that's a big factor as well when it comes to this. But then you look at teams like the Houston Roughnecks, who are averaging 5,957. That number continues to drop. They may actually trend more into the red zone on this one because last year they were averaging 7,056. So they're down roughly about 1,100 per game. It's actually not insanely much of a difference, but you see my point there. Then we get to the Memphis Showboats. This is a red flag all the way through, and I am in no form or fashion stating that there is a lot going on here. 4,447 is the average currently. They are up and down. It's like a wave in a boat on a wave. 4,373, 4,753, and then 4,215. We'll see what happens in the remaining weeks. They will be in Memphis this upcoming weekend, and then again in week 9, and then again in week 10. So it's 3 games remaining. Don't expect much out of this. When we look at the Michigan Panthers, again, I've talked about, they are on the up track of having a great attendance. They've had 4 games so far, 42,389. They are averaging 10,597 currently, and they are on track to beat last year's record of average and overall attendance. Whatever has been done in Detroit, I don't care if stadium still looks a little empty because it's Ford Field, it's an NFL stadium. It is still producing quite a bit for the league. As of right now, if you take St. Louis is always going to be the leader. It doesn't matter at this point. If you take St. Louis out of it, right now depending on what San Antonio does, the remainder of the 2 games they have left in San Antonio, which are both on Friday nights, I'm not too thrilled with. But Michigan has the opportunity to either come very close to DC or potentially coming in second in the non-St. Louis market. So that is absolutely amazing for them. But yeah, then we move on to San Antonio. They have 2 games. They dropped almost 13, close to about 3,000 people from game 1 to game 2. Those orange numbers are all Friday night games. We'll talk about those in a second. As to what those kind of mean in this factor. But again, even St. Louis, who has had 4 games, is down. There's a lot of factor in St. Louis. They had to share nights or games with the St. Louis Blues, who were in the playoffs at that time. The Cardinals. I've heard the Cardinals have had kind of a attendance issue this year as well. So there's a lot to kind of play into that factor there, that I do think that we kind of all have to kind of take a step back and look at. But again, 29,805 overall. Then we go down to the total. As of right now, 337,442, which talked on the weekly attendance show, averaging 12,052. I, again, put this number right here in yellow because, quite frankly, it's about 1,500, just about 1,500 difference from last year on the average. That's significant when you take into consideration if you're averaging almost about 1,500 every game less or in those certain markets. That is absolutely massive when it comes at the end of the year. As you can see here, I put at the bottom the remaining games and what they have. Week 7 just passed. Keep in mind, Memphis, I apologize. When I wrote this, Memphis still has 2 games left. I was reading week 7, and when I made this chart, week 7 was still in there. So week 8, week 9, and week 10 we have left. We have San Antonio game this upcoming week, which is week 8. And then San Antonio in week 10 is their home game, and they will face the Arlington Renegades. So I'm curious to see if that game gets higher numbers, meaning San Antonio and Arlington aren't like exactly that far apart. I mean, there's sort of a drive there, but it's not as bad. But yeah, as you can see, 8, 9, and 10 are the remaining weeks we have, and you can see when Week 8, technically speaking, they would have St. Louis would have their 5th final game, but they have that extra game in St. Louis in Week 9. Week 9 will be a key point for Birmingham and Houston. Those will be their 2 final home games. Potentially, Birmingham gets another one in the playoffs. And then, of course, you have Week 10 with Memphis and Michigan and DC closing out the season for their home game. So we'll take a look at those numbers as we go through. But let's move forward here and look at XFL 2023, UFL 2024, UFL 2025 XFL teams. And, of course, I did include Houston in this, in that realm. So Arlington Renegades, obviously, only 5 games in 2020, as we've talked, but you can see there's been a dip. Not much, obviously, from 2024 to 2025. I think that's pretty consistent when it comes to that. Obviously, right now, we'll see what DC does. They're on track to go above that 70,000. We'll see how the end of the season comes. But, again, they go 2023, 71,000. They dipped by roughly about 400 people total from 2023 to 2024. Not bad there. And if they encompass that this year and go above 70,000 or 71,000, that'll be a very good way of looking at it of like, okay, DC is definitely a market that they need to focus on what they're doing there in other markets. Houston Roughnecks, again, this number, I do not think they're going to come close to that 35,000, but it is a possibility they could come closer to it. I just don't think it's going to be that close. And that's a drop. 2023 at TDECU Stadium in the XFL, they had 58,838, and then it dropped to 35,282 with Rice Stadium in 2024. And this year, it may be under that 35,000. So it is something to look at. There is an attendance problem in Houston and when we get to like the overall perspective, but in the XFL markets, of course, that originated in the XFL. San Antonio Brahmas, you can see the dip here. 74,000 in 2023, almost 75. 2024 with the merger, they dropped almost roughly about 15,000 people. And then you had 2025. Obviously, there's only 4 games in San Antonio, so that number is going to be down regardless. But San Antonio essentially has the opportunity, if they were getting that 14,000 for the remaining games each game, they could potentially bring in just almost what they got in 2025. So that would be impressive. I don't think they'll hit that. The Battlehawks, that's, again, another market that continues to drop year after year. Even in 2023, in the XFL, they had 175,521. 2024, that included both regular season games and the conference game and the championship game. 171,825, and then 2025 you had 119,219 so far. We'll see if they even come close to that. With the extra game, they should be able to, and with the championship game, depending on who's playing in it, we'll see. Again, XFL division and championship game, all to be determined. Total right now, I'm not quite sure what the number here was about that I put, but whatever. Overall, 308,636 from the XFL teams in this perspective. Let me go back here. So then we look at, this is even more of a further breakdown of 2025 with Friday nights. How is Friday nights doing on a attendance level? So in reality, Friday night is lower than normal, but I guess you could say if they didn't have St. Louis in there, that could be another factor here. But Friday night is averaging about, give or take, I would say about the 9,000. I didn't put the averages on here, but again, when we're looking at the normal games that are outside of St. Louis, you're averaging roughly about 8 to 9,000. It's not bad. They've drawn 82,668 on Fridays, or on Saturdays 8,739. These are all based off time, like frames for Eastern time frames. Again, Saturdays, you're seeing a lot of numbers in there in the 4,000. So I don't think this really, in that perspective, matters much, but to just give you a sight to see what those different time frames are bringing in attendance-wise, I don't think Friday nights are the worst for attendance compared to some of the slots on Saturday. But then we get over to Sunday, and there's been a lot of people complaining about this 12 p.m. Eastern time slot for attendance and TV ratings. And quite frankly, like, it's bringing in, as of right now, 50,909 total attendance on that time slot. Sundays have got 157,073 attendance. Sundays work very well for the league. I just don't know how they would do if they, like, say next year they expand and they have one game on Friday, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday, or they have 1 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday, how that would affect things. But here's your numbers in attendance on Sundays. It's a hit or miss in that number. Then we look at attendance by week. So this is a breakdown per week of every single league: XFL 2020, 2023, UFL 2024, 2025. As I talked about on the attendance and TV ratings, week 7 of the UFL this year was the lowest on record in modern day spring football, including the AAF in 2019. When you look at the overall perspectives here, you can kind of see the downward trend. So if you did fill in maybe 2020 for the XFL, you're probably going to get way more than that 632,000 that the XFL had in 2023. But in general, when then you take away the 4 markets that the XFL had in 2024 or 2023 that were a lot of people were complaining about and whatnot, and then you put in the 4, technically 3 locations that the USFL had, you saw there was quite a drop in attendance from 632,328 to 580,711. Not much, like not a huge difference, but you get my point there. Then we look at this year. They are on the track to be lower than last year. That is kind of where we're sitting at. I still say that if somehow St. Louis, the numbers are going to be skewed at that point, but if St. Louis can make the XFL championship game in St. Louis and then advance to the championship game in St. Louis, I 100% think they will go over the 580,711 in attendance if they kind of stay on track and they don't continue to have these 28,806 weeks. And I don't think they will, based on the remaining schedule and who is at home and everything like that. We'll keep an eye on it. Obviously, there's still 2 Memphis games left. That's a big factor to kind of look at. And then, of course, Birmingham Stallions still have 2 games left. If they continue to draw 4,000 for those games, that's a concern that they may not hit the 580,000. Either way, they'll come close to it. If they do, they're still needing roughly, with the championship and the playoffs, you're still looking at about 200 and about 42,500 to get past the 2024 attendance. So give or take, does the UFL have an attendance problem in 2025? Yes, 100% they do, to answer that question. But the context of it is the fact that they are having issues with marketing across the board everywhere. And that's a big factor here. We move on to TV ratings here on this video as we're just about 40 minutes into it. UFL 2024 TV ratings on Saturday. So, as you can see, a lot of perspective here with the USFL in 2023. You had games on Saturday and on Sunday. Those were the only 2 days. Take a drink here. Those are only 2 days that the UFL had their games on. They were pretty consistent, but their time frames were kind of all over the place. It was either 12, 12:30, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, or 8 on Saturdays last year. Give or take, as you can see, most of these numbers were pretty big, in the millions. We have yet to really hit, as far as I know, 1 million in the UFL this year, which is kind of a concern when you look at the overall TV ratings. They are down, give or take. So you had Saturday there, you had 2024 Sunday ratings, and quite frankly, I think between the two, they pretty much averaged across the board in the time slots. I think in the Sunday time slots, the 12 p.m. Eastern time slot last year, they did pretty well, to be honest with you, in comparison. A lot of people were saying that that time slot isn't very well this year. It worked very well for them last year, especially on ESPN. We have seen ESPN become like a real drop this season in comparison to prior years, and ABC come out on top essentially as like the leader in this. So these are Sunday. Then we move on to UFL 2024 TV ratings by network. Obviously, when we're looking at overall perspective, Fox had more like actual TV rating or like programming than any other channel. They brought in 16 million, 20,000. I'm sorry, I've got to sneeze. Apologize. So 16 million and averaged about 942,000 in 17 games. They had way more than any other network. But ABC obviously came in second with 9,870,000, averaging 987,000 in 10 games. So their average was higher than Fox's average with just only 10 games. Then you had ESPN was on the lower side, just like they are this year, 708,000, averaging 10 games. And you had FS1 and ESPN2 in there, 240 and 250 this year. ESPN2 did not actually happen as it was supposed to, so not quite sure what that number would have been either way. But total overall last year, 37,300,000, averaging of 867,772 per game. Then we go to UFL 2025 this year for Friday night and Saturday. So as we look at this, Friday night was pretty consistent. They were getting about 690,000 to 680,000. That was kind of your average. And then the last couple of weeks, we've seen a dip. Week 5 was the NFL draft. That was the lowest week. But this past weekend, it was 540. That was their second lowest of Friday night. But overall, on Fox on Friday nights, they've brought in 4,350,000 viewers, averaging 621,429. So give or take, it's not the worst. But like in comparison, like we'll get to what each network is doing compared to last year. But again, right off the bat, Fox is getting 10 games on Friday nights guaranteed. So we'll go over those numbers. But as you look at Saturday numbers, you got 870,000, 900,000, 596,000. There doesn't seem to be a consistency. Obviously, there's only 2 slots on Saturday that have had the same TV time, which is 7 p.m. Eastern time on a Saturday, and Fox and ESPN. They almost drew the exact same numbers between the two networks. I'm surprised on this one, ESPN drew the higher one, but give or take, there hasn't been really a repeat of most of these Saturday game time slots. They're all over the place this year on that, which could be a factor of why you could see a huge difference in ratings, because there's no consistency on start times. Like, the NFL has a dedicated time slot for all their games throughout Sundays. We move on to Sundays. We have the 2025 TV ratings. So you have Sunday at that 12 p.m. Eastern time slot has gained about 3,856,000, averaging 642,662 or 667. Now, if we go back to Sunday ratings in that same time slot last year, it was averaging about 882,857. So, yeah, this year that time slot is dropped quite a bit. I know a lot of times, at least when the games are on ABC, they're getting the higher number here, but the also thing is too, most of those times, at least here where I live, those games are like, don't start for an hour into them because of church programming in local regions that go over the game until that programming's over. It's usually from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Mountain Time, or wherever the case may be. That first hour of the game is not showing on ABC in that time slot because of predetermined programming for local churches and regions. So that's an interesting perspective there. But if we look across the rest, Sunday at 3 p.m. has been a consistent slot for the league as well, drawing in 1,993,000, averaging 498,250. And then as you go on here, I forgot to put Sunday at 4 p.m. as there's no average there as of right now with only one game. But as you can see, the FS1 game still got 520,000, which is a lot higher than the FS1 game last year, almost double, which we've talked about. But again, when you look at these perspectives, you can kind of see the conclusion here that it's kind of just all over the place with numbers. And when you're really looking at the UFL 2025 TV ratings by network and you're breaking that down, Fox right now is at 6,330,000, averaging 527,500. And I apologize, I'm a little under the weather still, but ABC just shy of Fox's number. But again, Fox does have more programming this year. If ABC had more, I think at this point they'd have a higher TV rating than Fox because they are leading. But 5,036,000, averaging 839,333. But look at that number, though, in comparison to Fox's amount they have, which is 12 games total so far. They're averaging about 527,000 viewers, where ABC for only 6 games is averaging 839,333. ABC is the network for the UFL, which is crazy to think, but it has been the better area in this. ESPN, they're the lowest across the board, 4,123,000, averaging 458 this season. FS1, obviously that one game at 520,000. But total viewership so far year to date, 16,009,000 viewers year to date, averaging 571,750. So again, there's your numbers currently for this perspective when it comes to TV. As we can see, ABC is the leading here, but Fox it's not where they were at last year. I'm very curious when we look at the networks. 16 million viewers for Fox. They will not hold the championship game this year. That is ABC, which I think is a great decision when they're switching up. I think the championship game on prime time on ABC on a Saturday night could do very, very well for the league. I think that is a prime spot that could help them. But again, if you look at these numbers, there's been only technically close to 3 games that have almost gone to 1 million. 3 games. Compared to last year, they had multiple games at over 1 million viewership. So again, when we ask the question, is there TV ratings and attendance issues with the UFL in 2025 for season 2? 100%. That is the answer to both of those questions when we really look at this. And that essentially wraps up this video here with all these TV ratings and everything like that when it comes to just the overall perspective. Sorry, my camera is already timed out with this. But anyways, when you look at the overall perspective of the attendance and everything like that, there is a major discourse here of where we're looking at compared to last year, at least through 7 weeks. Now, we don't know what it'll end up being by the end of the year. We'll definitely have a special video going over that. And kind of at that point, we'll only compare the 2024 to the 2025 UFL seasons and kind of see what that is. But again, yes, the cost would go up if they added 2 more teams next year with 2 more venues. But again, they could end up getting more ratings, more attendance to kind of stable that out, especially if they can get into 2 decent areas that are hungry for football and can do numbers like DC, do numbers like St. Louis and places like that, that could balance out the league and really help overall when it comes to those perspectives. So let me know in the comments what you think. Obviously, we know marketing is a huge thing when it comes to this league. Marketing, commercials, local advertising, whatever the case may be, I think they did not change anything, in my opinion, from last year. I think it got worse. There's some markets like Michigan, I think, did very well. DC's doing very good. That they need to continue driving those numbers and driving that marketing in those areas. I still, to this day, even after going over all this numbers and data, do not think they should move any markets in 2026. After 2026, and if you expand, I do think it is appropriate at that time to really look going into year 4. But I still think if we are going to just delete out the conversation of the USFL and XFL in numbers in 2023, 2022 timeframes, that I really think they should give each market 5 years. In 5 years, I think they should go back, even if they've expanded. Each market gets 5 years to determine if they stay or not. After 5 years, I think that's where you start looking at potentially if you don't have owners at that point. That's the other part to this conversation. If they can get owners to buy these teams, and it doesn't it's not appeasing when the team's not good, the team doesn't have attendance, the TV ratings may be down for that team or whatever the case may be. But if you can sell the teams and get someone that owns it and putting their own money into marketing, I think that's where we're going to see the difference. We just got to get there. But if we're going to continue to switch up markets and move teams or do all that type of stuff, I don't ever think we're going to see a time where this all kind of stables out to being a league that works. I'm not saying the league should go under. I'm not saying that it will. It's just there's got to be consistency with every realm of things like the XFL in 2020 had, but I also don't think that you need to go out and bring those exact people in, which who knows if they even care to come back to the league. A lot of people are saying, oh, the XFL or the UFL needs to go get Vince McMahon and Oliver Luck to work together. Clearly, you don't know that there was a lawsuit between those two, and I'm pretty sure they would never work together again. There was a lawsuit that ended up getting closed out, and there was a unidentified amount of money paid out to, I believe, Oliver Luck and whatever the case may be. Again, they're not going to work together. I don't think that pulling in people from years past is going to do anything different, because you're already in a situation currently that you need to fix, not bring in former people to rerun your league altogether. But again, let me know in the comments what you think about all this data. It is a lot. There is going to be timestamps throughout the video, so keep an eye on that. But I hope that this kind of gives you more of a perspective of where we're at of the league and where we're potentially heading, and that in reality, all this could be solved by Fox Sports, ESPN, Disney, Danny Garcia, Redbird Capital, just putting in more money to market this league. Because again, when it comes to payroll for players, staff, coaches, whatever the case may be, that's a different budget than marketing. Marketing is a separate budget for all companies. They are not together. When I hear people are like, oh, well, the league's now going to have to pay their players more because of CBA, that's going to lessen the money in marketing. Those aren't even the same like areas of your company. You have to have differences in your marketing budget, your in like payroll budget, your like cost of like equipment, stadium rentals, whatever the case may be. Those are all different areas. You don't just combine all those and like, hey, this is a major bucket. You have different venues that you look at for where you're budgeting. Hey, we're going to set this amount for budgeting, this amount for the CBA agreement and stuff like that. It's not like, hey, we've got to play players more now, so we're going to have less of a chance to market because we just took out more money out of that. That's not how that works. But if those entities could come together that are co-own this league and want this league to succeed, one, they need to put better people at place to do that, but they also need to provide the money to actually get that going. And I think that's going to be the uphill battle that the league is going to have to either decide if what is currently working is working and they're comfortable at expanding based off that. But let me know again in the comments what you think, and we will see you back here on the flip side for Friday for the overall pick'ems and week 8 as we travel into week 8 pick'ems and previews. Have a great day, everyone. See ya on the flip side. Have a great one.